skillful. He's knowledgeable. He looks to the future. He doesn't live just for today. He lives for those who are going to come behind him.
He's a very quiet person. He keeps to himself, and the work that he does, he tends not to want recognition for, and tends to work behind the scenes on many of his projects.
He's a person that does most of the work himself. He hardly ever asks anybody to do what he can't do himself. He really is a one-man show. If he's on duty at the weekend, and I come in on Monday morning, it's like 10 elves have been at work. He does all his own typing, and he does it to perfection as he does everything.
He never passes judgment on anyone. As far as the finances of the practice go, he's not concerned with each person's ability to pay.
He just has a good sense of humor, and you know when he doesn't, and you leave him alone. But most of the time he is, he's a caring person about his patients and his parents and the staff.
He's a very soft person. He's a very emotional, feeling person. And I don't know that he wouldn't want people to know, but he is very spiritual. And he's very private about that.
He treats every patient as if it were his own family. I don't think there could be any higher compliment for a physician or a health professional that they approach every individual as if they belong to them. And that assures that everything is done as it should be done.
This year's winner of the John H. Whitcomb Quality Service Award has been taking care of our tiniest, most critically ill patients for the past 20 years. His life's work is woven through the history of our neonatal program since its infancy. And because of his dedication and drive, Sacred Heart Hospital's Neonatal Intensive Care Unit has kept pace with the ever-changing field of neonatology. Nomination forms indicate that this physician is the epitome of our core values, treating patients, families, colleagues, and co-workers with the utmost dignity and respect, and taking the time needed to show families the compassion and care they deserve at a critical time in their lives.
At the time of a distressed baby's birth, the parents are very anxious and distressed themselves. And he has the ability to talk to them quietly and calmly, clearly explain the problem, and also give them hope at the end of sometimes what's a very difficult disease process.
Typing, he will write letters to individuals that he has maybe spent some time with them, giving them every kind of encouragement that he can. And there aren't too many physicians that take the time to sit down at their computer and write a personal letter to somebody that, like that. And I think the patients' parents certainly appreciate that.
He was one of the first physicians to really look at supporting families when babies really had no chance of survival, and to help families to develop a approach to them to help them understand that and deal with that. Another thing that comes to mind is about 10 years ago when we did one of our first reunions. I saw him standing on the sidelines watching parents being filmed telling about their stories. And he was really reliving all of the days of those children that were in the intensive care nursery and the emotion that the families were going through. Knowing that he had been a part of that meant a lot to him.
On a quest to provide critically ill babies with the most up-to-date health care possible, Dr. John Nagel has marched into meetings with new ideas for providing the best of care at the lowest possible cost.
sometimes some of the group would feel like, well, gosh, here comes Dr. Nagel with 100 more proposals to improve things. And that was true. He regularly came with ideas and innovations and things that he felt should be done to improve it. And that was his nature, to study what was going on in the intensive care and what was nursery and what was going on with the patients, and constantly looking for ways to improve it and keeping abreast of the newest therapies.
Those closest to him say his mind seems to be constantly working out new ways to enhance the quality of care delivered in our neonatal intensive care unit. He is credited as a driving force behind the development of the neonatal training program here. When times were tough and the NICU's survival was threatened by high patient census and poor reimbursement, Dr. Nagel worked at the local and state levels to ensure the viability of the unit. Dr. Nagel devised a bed-sharing plan to help cut costs. He was instrumental in the addition of a neonatal step-down unit to prevent overcrowding in the ICN. And he is credited with designing a discharge incentive program to decrease the length of a patient's stay. Staff members have found him up all night at work, reviewing, generating, and implementing innovative approaches to neonatal health care delivery.
He's always looking at some new way to fix something, whether it's a computer generated discharge summary, anything that will make life better for everybody.
We've come a long way in caring for our community's very sick babies. To realize just how far we've come, we have to take a look back in time as the stage was being set for this gifted physician's arrival. In the 1960s, very little could be done for critically ill babies. These struggling infants were often considered hopeless cases. Sacred Heart's goal at that time was simply to provide these babies with comfort care. In 1970, on the brink of a new decade and a new era at Sacred Heart, it was Dr. Ed Westmark who opened a small neonatal intensive care unit here. It would be Dr. Westmark's leadership that would influence a young pediatric resident fresh from the California coast to specialize in the field of neonatology.
He was a prodigious worker, was able to work long, hard hours, and in the early days we used the Navy helicopters to conduct transports, and he went out on many of those and on the van, and very difficult and trying times with not enough manpower, really, and long, hard hours, but he's the kind of guy you can't keep down, and he's going to do it.
In 1972, Sacred Heart was designated one of the state's first regional perinatal intensive care centers. The unit's reputation grew, and its capabilities blossomed. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, John Nagel was working towards his medical degree in California. In 1974, he graduated from the University of California at Davis and embarked on his pediatric residency in Pensacola. It was in 1976 that Dr. Nagel accepted a neonatal fellowship working in conjunction with his mentor, Dr. Westmark, at the University of Florida. Soon after Dr. Nagel joined Sacred Heart's medical staff as a neonatologist, additional neonatologists came on board: Dr. Charles Applin, Stephen Sims, and Ken Carter.
Very soon after John arrived, we realized that he had unusual talents. And of course, when you find somebody with talents, you give them more responsibility and more work to do, which he was more than able to take care of. But he also became a leader in terms of teaching and education. He was a very good teacher. And he cared about his colleagues and those that he was responsible for. He would reach out to them. And the other thing of it is, when he was on call, you could go to sleep and not worry about anything.
In the early days of the NICU, he frequently helped transport critically ill babies. When transport teams had to travel more than 100 miles, the Navy provided a helicopter crew who would take the physician and nurse to pick up critically ill babies in outlying areas. Dr. Nagel performed these transports during off time, often working over 100 hours a week. During the second year of his fellowship, Dr. Nagel spent time in Gainesville on his fellowship, followed by 2 weeks' work in the ICN. On his off days, he had to do transports and help out in the nursery in the afternoons. Dr. Nagel knew that this type of dedication was required to continue the program. It was the beginning of a 24-hour-a-day in-house call by the neonatologists to provide essential care.
The very early days of setting up the neonatal intensive care unit, hours and hours were spent on the road developing relationships and networks with our referral hospitals and physicians. Those early physicians, Dr. Nagel included, did a wonderful job, and we are still reaping the benefits of what they did all those years ago. They actually went out and taught their peers how to handle babies to optimize their chance until they could get to Sacred Heart.
All the while, the young physician's mind was filled with ideas. To enhance the hospital's infant transport program, Dr. Nagel created a transport paramedic training course and subsequent nurse transport course that continues to serve as the basis for pediatric transport services at Children's Hospital. He spent many long hours teaching the necessary skills and knowledge nurses needed to perform these transports.
Looking back on it, it was kind of a nightmare in a way. At the time, you were so immersed in what had to be done, you didn't really think about it. You just had to get it done.
Dr. Nagel's ideas evolved into achievements that span more than 2 decades at Sacred Heart. In the early 1980s, he created a computerized patient medical database and patient billing system. He designed and implemented a perinatal outreach program. And he initiated a high-risk medical follow-up clinic through Children's Medical Services.
We first started doing outreach teaching. He was very involved, or he was the physician who was the most involved in spearheaded outreach teaching.
One of his most recent achievements in the early 1990s has been the push for nurse practitioners in the ICN. He has overseen the recruitment, training, and establishment of protocols for ARNPs here, and he continues today to work in an advisory capacity with the NP program at the University of South Alabama. He also endorsed use of the drug surfactant in our NICU to improve the lung capacity of premature babies and enhance their chances for survival.
He was the chief investigator for our institution during the ExaSurf trials to enable us to start using lung surfactant materials prior to their release on the open market so we could ensure a better patient outcome.
Dr. Nagel's boundless energy has benefited Children's Hospital as a whole. A co-founder and president of Friends of Children's Hospital, he helped organize and produce our first annual Children's Miracle Network telethon in 1986. In fact, Dr. Nagel purchased promotional posters for the telethon and even hand-placed the posters in local businesses. His early work with the telethon gave the fundraising event credibility and helped provide fertile ground for an event responsible for generating hundreds of thousands of dollars for Children's Hospital.
During the first telethon, when we didn't really have a lot of people helping us, he was one of those who was there in the very beginning and throughout. He spent his own money and produced a poster for that first telethon and just went around town distributing it. A couple of years later, he was still delivering coin canisters and picking them up in locations like laundries and Circle K's and around town. And that, I just think, says a lot about him as a person.
Where does this determination and endless drive come from? Apparently, it's been there since childhood.
He's a very determined person. His mother called him John Bull when he was a child, and really he's very, he's stubborn, and by stubborn I mean he is stubborn to the point where he gets things done.
Originally from Hamilton, Ohio, Dr. Nagel grew up in Michigan, the son of Swiss-German descendants. His high school class voted him most respected and most likely to succeed. His undergraduate years were spent in the U.S. Naval Academy, followed by service as a Navy line officer on the helicopter carrier, the USS Princeton, and on the hospital ship, the USS Sanctuary.
First ship he was on was a helicopter carrier, and that was where he became interested in medicine, really. He met a couple of the doctors on the helicopter carrier because they went to Vietnam 3 times and they brought in helicopters with casualties. So that's where he really got interested in medicine. And then his second shift that he was on was a hospital shift.